Alright, y'all, welcome back to AP World History. This is going to be Unit 2, Day 8. Reminders to make sure you have your history notebook out and you're taking notes as you move through the video. Make sure that you complete the vocabulary for this video, which will be on the next slide and down in the description. So, our key terms for today are going to be Reconquista, the Encomienda System, the Mita System, the Repartmiento System, Cortez, Pizarro, Columbus, the Taino, de las Casas and the Black Legend, Viceroys, Audiencas, and Royal Colonies. Key concepts for today are going to be the political characteristics of Iberian colonization, the social structure in Iberian-controlled Latin America, the demographic impact of Iberian colonization. So, as we've kind of talked about before, we talked about the Reconquista in Iberia or in Spain, where over hundreds of years the Spanish kick out the Muslims and kind of reset up the Catholic power and Catholic Church in Spain, and they kind of set up a model for how it's going to run in their colonies and newly conquered lands. This becomes the Iberian model, which is going to be the main model for the Spanish colonies in North America. Of course, aristocrats, who are going to be the wealthy, live in town. They do no manual labor. Bureaucrats are typically judges. Lawyers run the government. They live in town. Lawyers are appointed, and judges are appointed by the king because it's a royal colony. Larger towns have a church in the center. They have schools, which are set up by the church because the church and the government are allied together. And they really use this model for exploitation, kind of starting off in the Canary Islands and the Azores. For example, they enslave the natives, give the land to the Europeans, they set up plantations for the export of sugar and other tobacco and other cash crops. As the enslaved natives die off to diseases and brutal treatment, they import usually African slaves. Well, this is really going to start in the New World in the Caribbean with Columbus and his successors. Christopher Columbus is going to have early successes in the Caribbean with, finding and setting up hacienda systems and plantations and creating all of these kind of cash crop areas and enslaving the natives, and then it worked for the time. And they also create something called the Encomienda System, which is a pseudo form of slavery based on a religious rationale, meaning that if the native population did not convert to Roman Catholicism, they could be enslaved. If they were Roman Catholic and they converted, they could not be enslaved. This was ignored a lot, but pseudo-slavery, it's just slavery. The first indigenous people that Christopher Columbus kind of enslaves are going to be Taino in the Carib, which before Columbus arrived, they lived in small villages under the authority of chiefs. The Taino was conscripted to work in the gold mines and work plantations, and they were treated horribly. Brutal abuses. If they didn't mine a certain amount of gold or silver, they were just executed, which is really difficult because in the Caribbean there's not that much gold and silver, so a lot of people were just executed. Those brutal abuses plus smallpox equals that these populations just die off and they just disappear. There are some conquistadors that you need to know in the conquest of Mexico and Peru. Generally, the conquests were not unified. They were kind of haphazardly done in order to conquer the area. They were normally led by one person, and they were a group. They seeked God. They seek gold and glory. They were not focused on religion. The conquest takes about a little under 100 years to kind of end the conquest. The king is going to hear about these conquests, going to set up royal administrations. The two biggest ones you know for right now are going to be Hernan Cortez. He's going to invade Mexico, and when he gets to the Aztec capital, the emperor is going to think that Cortez is like the an avatar of Quetzalcoatl, which is the war god. He's going to capture the emperor, hold him hostage, and eventually the people are going to push Hernan Cortez out, and then Hernan Cortez is going to wipe out the Aztecs and conquer the Aztecs. The next one's going to be Pizarro, Francisco Pizarro. He's going to do something similar with the Incas. He's going to capture the Incan emperor, hold him hostage, and even after the Incas pay the ransom, he's still going to hold him hostage. And eventually the Incas are going to push him out, and he's going to come in and take over and wipe him out, or wipe out a large majority of them. And it's awful, right? So again, as every part in the red on this map is going to be the control of the Spanish. They have parts of California, Oregon, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, Florida, all of Central America, and a big kind of Pacific coast part of South America, because remember, Brazil was given to Portugal in the Treaty of Tordesillas. So, what does all this come into? This comes into a demographic shift. This is going by 1750, due to the influx of European diseases and conquering and conquest. The population is going to drop from 125 million people to 5 million people. This is known in many native cultures as the Great Mortality, and this Great Mortality is just the 90% of the Native American population is just going to be wiped out, killed due to diseases or killed due to conquest. Now, there are stories and there are kind of legends passed down that all the Spanish did was murder and commit violence and rape and steal and do all these things, and this is really perpetuated by the Black Legend. And this was really kind of set up by De las Casas and perpetuated by De las Casas, that the Spanish were murderers. And that's all they did. It was only violence, rape, theft, and killing of Native Americans. And so much so, he raises such a fuss, and people start believing this, but by 1550, the Spanish king calls for a commission to investigate, and they're going to kind of become more involved in North America, and they're going to start to really set up kind of commissions and administration and things to really make sure that these abuses aren't happening, because again, they're Christian, they're Catholic, they shouldn't be doing this on a regular at all. And when it really comes back and that these things happened, these men not necessarily persecuted, but they are kind of censured. Now, Spanish colonial administration is formalized by 1570. We have administrative centers in Peru and Mexico governed by viceroys. And then the viceroys are reviewed by audiencias, or courts, who are appointed by the king. So the king is going to appoint a viceroy. That viceroy has control over an area. And then you have an audiencia who only answers to the king, who's going to monitor and check that viceroy and making sure they're not abusing the natives and abusing their power. And for the Portuguese, Brazil, they're really going to set up after Cabral kind of explores, and they name Brazil after the Brazil nut, and is given to Portugal after the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Portuguese king is going to grant Brazil to the nobles, and it's going to be a major, major sugar plantation by the mid-16th century. Let's talk about North America for a moment. So, on the east coast of North America, you're going to have the French and English. They're seeking furs, fish, trade routes. They're seeking to set up colonies to make sure that they can make money in the New World. France is going to set up in the St. Lawrence Valley, the Mississippi Valley, River Valley, the Great Lakes region. England's going to set up along the Atlantic seaboard, of course, with the 13 colonies, and St. James Bay, or the Hudson Bay. Holland and Sweden are gonna settle at the beginning, like area of New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Those are gonna be they're gonna be kicked out and taken over by the Netherlands. The Caribbean, all 4 of these countries own sugar islands in the Caribbean, and the sugar islands in the Caribbean are going to make more money than all of North America put together. It's a big, booming business in the Caribbean during this time. And the colonial governments are going to be different from Iberian colonies during this time. In North American colonies were controlled mostly by private investors, joint stock companies, with little royal financial support except in protection and taxation. Not to say that the kings and queens of these areas did not have any influence. They most definitely did. It's just that they were more self-governed. And of course there was a royal authority and you were always back to the mother country, but again there's a lot more self-government, kind of hands-off. In North America, the religious population drops 90%, similar to that with the Iberian colonies. This is going to be due to wars, death, diseases. It's very similar as it was with the Iberian colonies. Now, there are different forms of labor, and taxation are going to be created through the exploitation of Indians. Of course, with the Hacienda system, which we talked about before. Then we have encomiendas, which are going to be set up, which are going to use Indians as feudal-like labor. It's forced labor based on religious pseudo-slavery. Basically, if you didn't convert to Catholicism, right, or you weren't already Catholic, you're a slave. Doesn't matter, and the Catholics are technically supposed to teach you and kind of convert you to Catholicism. This does not happen, and they're just used as slaves until they die off. This is very similar to in Peru, they have the Mita System, which is similar to the Inca Cortez system, and the natives had to volunteer a certain percentage of their population to work in the mines and the plantations and the farms, and if you didn't or you resisted, the chances are was you're going to be wiped out. The Encomienda System is eventually replaced by the Repartmiento System, which is a little different from Encomienda System, but it's because the Spanish didn't come in and tell you who's going to work and take over, and you're now a slave. Sorry, a religious convert or a slave. You could decide, or the Spanish would come in. They would come in and be like, "Hey, all right, so what you're going to do is you're going to give us an X amount of your people to work on this farm. If you don't, we're going to wipe you out." It's just that. By the 17th century, many natives flee villages or they work for landlords in cities to avoid that conscription. Now, African slaves in the Americas, so eventually they start off with the American Indians, which are then going to be, die of diseases and brutal abuses, or they flee. This is going to move to indentured servants. Of course, indentured servants are, hey, you work as a slave, or you work on a farm for a certain period of time before your debt is paid off. Certain rebellions, Bacon's Rebellion, and other kind of uprisings, and kind of the people indentured servants know the language. They can revolt easier. They can kind of set up mutinies and things. That eventually, it still happens, just doesn't happen as much, and it kind of falls out of favor. And then, of course, it moved to African slaves. African slaves already know how to work. They know how to work on farms, work with domesticated animals, all of these things. And they don't know your language, so it's difficult it's not impossible, but it's difficult for slaves to kind of revolt at the beginning. That's what we're going to end for today. Please make sure you are following along with the video in your notebook, and you're completing the vocabulary for this video as well. If you have any questions, please ask in class, and I'll see you guys in class. All right, bye.